Good morning, everyone. I'm here to introduce Dr. Isis Arce Vega, who provides strategic leadership in the areas of curriculum, assessment, faculty development, distance learning, career and workforce education, and partnerships for educational equity. Currently, she serves as Vice President for Academic Affairs at Valencia College in Orlando, Florida, one of the nation's most innovative community colleges, serving more than 70,000 students each year. We are so honored that you are here, Dr. Isis Arce Vega. Welcome, and thank you so much for your time.
My first hope for you this morning is thus that you bring this spirit of urgency, of possibility, and of care. Bring it with you to your equity work. Equity work requires that same level of focus, of discipline, of collaboration, innovation, and again, care with which we responded to the pandemic. My second hope for you, particularly today, on day one of this institute, is that you aim for depth and concreteness in the problem or challenge that will be the focus of your equity work. Depth and concreteness. When I say depth, I say so because we often want to jump in. We often want to jump to solutions. We are problem solvers, many of us. And I am all in favor and certainly characterized by a healthy impatience and an action orientation. In the case of equity work, however, we often find ourselves implementing strategies or solutions that are not sufficiently rooted in a deep understanding of the challenge or the opportunity, right? They are related and yet not deeply aligned. By concreteness, I mean identifying metrics. I do mean a certain level of measurability. The absence of this depth and of concreteness has characterized, I would say, the bulk of our equity work in higher education. And as a result, we have found ourselves disappointed by the results, or just as often, unable to celebrate our accomplishments. Achieving depth, however, requires asking more questions, deeper questions such as, in the area of diversity and access to what? Is it enough for students of certain identities to enroll in our institutions in greater numbers? Or might we also consider, what will they encounter when they do enroll, when you are successful? How will they feel if our efforts are successful and they enroll? Will their presence and will their identities be validated? In turn, if we think deeply about equity, we commit to looking at outcomes. That is a distinguishing feature of equity as a construct. Traditional outcomes like course success, retention, completion, learning, of course. But what will underlie these data? How will we know if staying in our institutions and earning our degrees is truly supporting students toward their longer term goals of leading happy, healthy lives of purpose, lives aligned with their values and dreams, cognizant of societal opportunities and threats that abound? What will students know and be able to do when they attain your institution's credentials? Will they find themselves, like many of us, challenged to have conversations about race and justice? Or will we commit to giving them those safe opportunities to learn how to engage with and grow from difference? And as we begin then to implement strategies that are aligned with these deeper versions of our equity or inclusion or diversity goals, how are we going to know if they're working and how well they're working? That's where concreteness comes in. It facilitates evaluation and improvement, and this work is urgent and necessitates that continual evaluation and improvement. I'll provide a couple of examples from my own institution, Valencia College, where I've been for a couple of years now, just a couple. In the initial phase of our strategic planning, we articulated ambitious, equitable, numerical targets in the 4 areas associated with our mission as a community college: student access, completion, transfer, and career credentials. But as we shifted to strategy, you'll see that these lack depth. They won't work. They don't. There are not strategies that are at that level that would function well and allow us to achieve our important work. So instead, in the area of access, we asked ourselves that same question I posed a moment ago. Access to what? and we looked at our data. And what our data tell us is that our students of varied identities are not pursuing the high wage life and family changing careers at the same rates. They simply are not. And so therefore our access strategies, they must be more intentional. They must be more segmented. We cannot simply hope that by bringing in more numbers of students, they will equally attain and embark upon these same pathways. It is not about enrollment. It is about access. To the point of concreteness, because most of our goals, like yours, are longer term goals, we crafted for each leading indicators so that we can see how we're doing and refine our efforts. Completion at Valencia, for instance, correlates to the completion of students' first 15 credits, right? That is one of our strongest early indicators. So we monitor these data closely. There's something else that I really, really appreciate about this level of concreteness and that I would recommend, if I may, and that is it allows for and necessitates accountability. In our case, it means that we shared our bold equity goals internally, externally, and with our governing board. We said these are our targets, and we insisted to all of them that they hold us accountable. My third sincere hope for you this morning is that you engage in this work in deep and genuine partnership with faculty. If faculty are not already represented on your teams, I would encourage you to bring them on board as soon as you are able. There are so many reasons for this, but I will name a few in the interest of time. So much of what our students experience in our institutions is mediated by faculty and by the classroom in particular. We can, and I would argue must, continue to encourage out-of-class engagement and involvement. So many powerful ways for students to learn outside of the classroom. Yet it is still the case that for many of our students, the faculty member is the only institutional stakeholder with whom they regularly engage, and our classroom the only institutional context they regularly inhabit. We leave faculty out of our equity work at our own risk. The second reason I would suggest is that equity without learning is a hollow and empty goal. It is only fully realized when the completion of our degrees and credentials and progress in our institutions represents knowledge, skills, and competencies. Again, without them, access and inclusion, empty promises. The third and last reason for faculty as essential in our work is that pedagogy and curriculum are two of the most powerful levers we have for advancing equity. Students have been telling this to us for decades now. It is no surprise that when students made those bold lists of demands for diversity and inclusion at various parts in our country's history, they looked to the curriculum. They wanted to see themselves and their identities reflected and validated. When they don't, what we say to them is that their identities have less merit. Pedagogy and curriculum, I would say, are also such powerful levers for equity. We have not only known it, but lately we have empirical evidence that we did not have at other points in our history. We have proof. We are seeing the most rigorous educational studies we have seen in quite some time demonstrate the impact of practices around transparency and active learning and scaffolding and culturally responsive teaching. We are seeing them correlate to higher performance for students from minoritized groups. As Freeman suggested with active learning, I would say that if this were a medical trial, we would have discontinued this study. We would have absolutely moved to widespread implementation. My fourth hope is that we approach this work with humility and curiosity. Now, Randy referenced inclusive humility with respect to data. My hope here is that you open out that principle of inclusive humility and take it through the entire work. If we reflect on our professional preparation and experiences, I think most of us would acknowledge that we were not formally taught how to advance equity. When math faculty James Gray worked with the Center for Urban Education, he coined a term for himself. He said, he had an aha moment of sorts, and he said, well, I am a first generation equity practitioner. This signaled both his recognition that he was new at this, that there was no precedent for this in his life or his community, and yet his commitment to learn and to stay in the work of being an equity practitioner. Humility means giving yourself permission and giving others permission to speak about race and about justice and equity, even when you know you're not going to get the words right every time. What one of my colleagues from the Pod Network, she called this giving ourselves permission to speak in first draft. It is our first draft. We assume that we come to this work with good intention, and yet we move through that discomfort and we speak because we must. It is the only way to do the work. If we stay too worried about saying things the wrong way or saying the wrong things, we simply will not get as far as we need to. I would say that participating in this institute is a really beautiful example of humility and willingness to learn with your institutions and with one another. I include curiosity in this hope because it can be tempting to rely on our personal experiences and assumptions and hypotheses, and to use our N of one or N of one or two or three to design strategy. I would again resist the urge to come up with solutions because as first generation equity practitioners, we need to become more comfortable acknowledging that we don't know. And if we had known, we would have implemented already. We do, however, have the skills and competencies to find out. Inquiry and curiosity is part of what we do and what we do really well in academia. Humility also means turning our gaze on ourselves, on our institutions and on our practices, and shifting away from looking for problems and limitations and weaknesses amongst our students. We have for far too long tried to fix them, help them learn our language, our norms, lament how ill-prepared they are, the poor choices that they make. What if we instead recognize that each student comes to our institution with vast strengths, skills, and experiences, and like each of us, the capacity to learn anything under the right conditions. And then we identify ways to improve our ability to serve them effectively. What don't we yet know how to do? Where are we getting in their way? At Valencia, we have a series of big ideas that have been around long before I got there. These are shared principles of sorts, and I just referenced one of my favorites, which is that anyone can learn anything under the right conditions. Lately, as part of our equity work, we've begun extending this idea and saying to one another, our student data tell us that we have not yet created the conditions in which our Black and Latinx students can all learn. I have to acknowledge it is hard. I still see the difficulty in our colleagues shifting their beautiful, bold proclamation of anyone can learn anything, coupled with this difficult acknowledgement that we have not created these conditions yet. And in that moment of struggle, of difficulty, of humility, of vulnerability, of courage, I see the energy and the conviction that it will take to move this work forward. My fifth and final hope for you this morning is that you engage in this work in an identity and race conscious way. That is, that we avoid the common practice of relying on euphemisms and proxies for race and identity, such as underrepresented or underserved or underprepared students, or to craft strategies that are race or identity neutral, that we hope will still somehow increase a set of outcomes for our Black, our Latinx, or students of other very specific identity groups. Student needs differ, and attaining equity requires policies, practices, and mindsets that differentiate. In fact, differentiation is what makes equity as a construct different from similar constructs like equality. Equality will not get us where we want to go. Equity will. One of the common hesitations or objections that I hear and that you may be feeling in this moment is that when we are race conscious, we may feel hypocritical, like we are doing the opposite of inclusion, like it's a different form of discrimination. I wanted to share with you thus a perspective that has helped me grapple with this tension, and it's from the lovely book, So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. Oluo reminds us that when we are race conscious, we are not engaging in a zero-sum game. She writes, and I quote, "Just because something is about race doesn't mean it's only about race. This also means that just because something is about race doesn't mean that white people can't be similarly impacted by it. And it doesn't mean that the experiences of white people negatively impacted is invalidated by acknowledging that people of color are disproportionately impacted. Disadvantaged white people are not erased by discussions of disadvantages facing people of color, just as brain cancer is not erased by talking about breast cancer. These are two different issues with two different treatments, and they require two different conversations. Therefore, if your institutional data or history reveal inequities associated with race and ethnicity, I implore you to keep race and ethnicity at the center of your learning, planning, and discussions. Like many institutions, we used to approach this work with a rising tide mentality at Valencia. And yet I will proudly say that in our strategic planning, we have been asking ourselves those hard questions. What may be coming in the way of success for our Black and Latinx students according to our data? And how will we design our response with and for them? And this, of course, means we're doing many of the things that you will begin doing over the next couple of days, engaging in a more holistic discussion of the data, considering explicitly partnering with students, looking to other institutions and perhaps other sectors for ideas. I want to close this provocation where I began. You did extraordinary things in response to one crisis, far more and better than anyone could have imagined. I know you will likewise astound with your equity work. I wish you courage, strength, patience, and wellness. And I can't wait to see what comes of your transformative efforts. Thank you.